Night presses on the field. TOC pitched near the black basalt coast of Adak. Sea mist sliding under canvas and beating on the antenna. 1LT, Evan Rourke studies a faint video downlink, while Singar's murmurs behind him. The RQ-11B Raven icon fading from a tablet map after its landing. A UH-60 on standby only. An enemy company minus. About 50 bodies. Compresses east. Sergeant. Nora Quinn reads the wind and the gaps where terrain forgets to be watched. Then asks to go dark for 8 hours, under non-lethal rules. SSG Mara Ellison and Rourke trade a quiet look. He authorizes and orders no patrols beyond the line. Nora's glove slips on, wet webbing. She fixes it. Kills her beacon. Breath-catching once as 20-knot gusts rake the cliff. Sometimes, leadership means trusting what you cannot see and owning the risk that comes with that choice. Nora steps into dead ground, and the tense red light blinks out. SSG Mara Ellison settles on comms in the field, TOC, near the black basalt coast, as sea mist creeps under the tarp and taps her boot. Singar's murmurs while the adversary's VHF cadence ticks along. Then an observation post check-in arrives 60 seconds late. She tags the time. Not huge, but not nothing. Whoa, one Tyler Beck relaunches the RQ-11B Raven, and the EOIR feed hints at a faint gap along the northern edge. 1LT, Evan Rourke, works with CPT Blake Anders to hold the eastern sector steady and repeats no patrols beyond the line. CPL Luis Ortega logs every ripple and hears the wind whip the antenna. His glove is wet and he fumbles the pen once, then gets it right. The tent breathes with the idea that a small delay might be the first real opening. Yet the choice is restraint. Sometimes the smallest tremor on a net tells you more than a shout. Because soldiers hear with nerves as much as headphones. The first confrontation arrives as silence on a clock, not as gunfire. Nora Quinn moves through dead ground where the seagrass hides seams that most maps ignore, planting small timed sound lures and keeping her IR blink reserved for friendlies only. She almost rushes a crossing, then waits for a gust to cover her step. Back in the field, TOC, SSG Mara Ellison logs a second silent observation post and tightens the record without a smile. 2 anomalies now, marked in neat ink. The RQ-11B Raven sits grounded for a battery change, but its last EOIR pass hinted at a thin blind lane that Nora now threads. Singar's hums while wind snaps the antenna and cold spray crawls under the tarp. 1LT Evan Rourke reigns in CPT, Blake Anders again. Hold beyond the line. CPL Luis Ortega keeps the time tag straight and curses softly when his pen skids on damp paper, then fixes it. The tent begins to feel the outline of nothing becoming something, like a dotted line of absence on the map. Sometimes the best number on a map is 0. No signal. No shots. No voices. Nora stays unseen, and the second silence lands like a measured breath. At 2:47 a.m., the adversary net calls movement in Sector 7. Then Steele starts talking to Fogg for roughly a minute and a half. Basalt throws the reports back so it sounds like more guns than there are. Earlier EOIR clips from the RQ-11B Raven show no opposing heat where they aim. Inside the field, TOC the Singars whisper with friendly traffic, while cold spray creeps under the tarp and turns paperwork soft at the corners. A headset slips off a damp collar and is pushed back into place. No one raises a voice. They just listen to empty impact. Sergeant. Nora Quinn is outside the perimeter, not crossing it. Just sliding along seams where grass hides uneven stone. She eases a few small sound lures into a loose triangle and lets a pebble kiss metal once. The noise does the walking. She almost dashes for a better angle, then catches herself and waits for a gust to drag the edges of the sound away from her shoes. Out beyond her. Muzzle flashes bleach the mist and then fade. At 3:12 a.m., a second enemy post goes silent. The adversary commander chops his words short, and every response on his net tightens. In the tent, SSG Mara Ellison notes the loss without celebration. CPL Luis Ortega marks a spike in rounds expended. The stepped bar on his tablet climbs a notch. UA-60 support stays on standby only. No one asks for it, because that would break the spell of patience they have chosen. The Raven sits grounded for a battery swap. Its last pass already drew the outline Nora needs. By 3:41 a.m. patrols push about 30 meters and lock up on presence, with no visual. One rifle pops. The rest follow like startled hands. Tracers wash the gray and show everyone exactly where the shooters are. On the ridge, 1LT, Evan Rourke feels CPT Blake Anders lean forward. He stops him with a quiet breath. Hold beyond the line. The rule is not a suggestion tonight. The strategy is to let fear collapse on itself, while Nora keeps time with absence. When people fire into fog, they are not aiming at an enemy. They are shooting at a fear that has been growing inside them. The firefight runs backward. And the only thing truly illuminated is the source of the shots. At 6:51 a.m., the adversary's command node blinks out. Exactly 17 seconds. The outage looks like a mundane hiccup. Backup power returns. Voices try to sound normal. The commander calls it routine and keeps his net moving. Coastal gray presses in. 20-knot gusts flick the tarps of both camps, and the cold spray smells like metal. Nora Quinn uses the small blind pocket without crossing their perimeter. She nudges the environment the way a hand straightens a crooked picture. A tarp tugged so it flaps toward a different line of sight. A marker stake turned, so a bearing reads a few ticks off. Two empty crates shuffled just far enough that a lane looks wrong when eyes return. She almost rushes the second crate, then stops. The next gust buys her 2 quiet steps that feel like luck and math. Inside the field, TOC. Singars hums with steady traffic. SSG Mara Ellison notes the blip with a calm pen stroke. CPL Luis Ortega updates the log and wipes a wet fingerprint that smears the margin. 1LT Evan Rourke keeps CPT Blake Anders on hold beyond the line. Patience is still policy. The RQ-11B Ravens' earlier EO/IR clips remain the only reference they need. UH-60 support stays on standby only. A line on a page and a rotor that never spins. When the lights are fully back, the enemy begins to argue with its own map. Bearings do not agree with memory. A sightline that was clean now catches on fabric. A corner that used to feel square feels shaved. Professionals recheck. Then recheck again. Which is the point. The play is not sabotage. It is a half-turn of the familiar that tilts certainty just enough to plant doubt. This is not an exotic trick. People lean on the familiar. And tonight the familiar has been nudged 5 degrees. The fight shifts with it. Away from metal and toward the place where reference points live. After the bursts at fog, the adversary pulls tight into a defensive square. Faces set outward like porch lights. Inside the field, TOC, near the Aleutian coast, Singars keeps a steady murmur, while 20-knot gusts bump the canvas and cold mist slicks the table. 1LT, Evan Rourke, repeats hold beyond the line and keeps the eastern sector steady. CPT Blake Anders fights the itch to push. Boot tapping once before he catches himself. SSG Mara Ellison tracks the square on a tablet as the RQ-11B, Raven's last EO/IR pass, shows a soft gap on the southern corner. Not a hole, so much as a place where attention thins. CPL Luis Ortega notes how their spacing compresses until helmets nearly touch in places. Pencil dulling mid-mark. Then scraping sharper on a torn page edge. Outside. Sergeant. Nora Quinn skirts the outer edge without crossing in. Letting the formation believe in its own walls. while wind and spray turn small noises into questions. The square keeps scanning for threats beyond its borders and misses the way shadows fold among boots and packs. UH-60 remains on standby only. A distant option that no one reaches for. The recognition arrives slowly in the tent. A formation built to protect has become a glass box that cannot see itself. And restraint still serves the mission under non-lethal rules. No formation is invincible. The real weakness is certainty in your own shape. The overlay on the tablet tightens like a fist. And everyone can feel how safety has started to trap the hands that made it. Nora Quinn circles the outside lip of the tightened square, staying on the far side of their perimeter, where seagrass hides, shallow dips, and basalt shelves break sound into crumbs. She chooses the edges, where men drift a step long or lean to scratch a knee. Close contact. Quick and quiet. Nothing theatrical. Each time she eases a body down, she checks the airway tilt out of habit, tags a friendly IR blink pattern for later pickup, and backs away before the wind dies. Once her glove snags on a strap and a buckle scrapes stone, she freezes, counts a breath, then lets a 20-knot gust carry the tiny noise into the spray. The square keeps facing outward. Their safety talks to itself. Inside the field TOC, near the Aleutian coast, Singars whispers steady traffic as SSG Mara Ellison tallies missing numbers that climb from 3 to 5 to 7. She marks each gap with the same careful pen stroke. CPL Luis Ortega logs time and location and notes the antenna clicking as wind slaps the guy line. His fingers are stiff and he shakes one out before writing again. 1LT Evan Rourke holds CPT Blake Anders at the line with a quiet hand. Non-lethal rules still stand. Pressure is built by absence, not by a push. The UH-60 is a line on a board. It stays that way. On the adversary net, the commander's voice tightens as patrols circle back and find bundled gear and clean ground. No blood. No scuffle. Only places where people should be and are not. Reports collide. Men argue bearings and last seen markers. Someone asks for permission to fire on movement and gets told to confirm. Then no one can confirm anything at all. In the tent, the realization settles that mercy is not a footnote. It is the method. Leaving an opponent breathing forces every man in that square to look inward and tally the night's useless rounds against the simple fact of a spared life. When you leave an opponent breathing, you hand them a harder question than pain. Why did I fire all night? And who is sparing me now? A soft IR blink winks on a dark slope. The tally on the tablet ticks upward, and Anders almost moves, then stops, because restraint is finally understood as the sharpest tool. First light edges in as a slow gray, and the adversary formation unravels into a loose stream of people instead of a unit. Officers try to shape the flow south with hand cuts and clipped orders. But men drift wide, then tighten, then drift again. Inside the field TOC, near the Aleutian coast, Singars keeps its low murmur. SSG Mara Ellison and CPL Luis Ortega sync the log with a rising tally of ammunition already burned on ghosts. Ortega rubs a cramped finger, then keeps writing. The RQ-11B Raven, fresh on battery, circles and confirms only 31 heat signatures still moving with any order. On the map, friendly tagged locations glint where Nora marked non-lethal recoveries. The IR codes are for friendlies, not magic, and they sit like quiet promises on wet slopes. 1. LT Evan Rourke holds CPT Blake Anders and the eastern sector steady under non-lethal rules. No pursuit beyond the line. The choice is to let gravity do the rest. Nora Quinn watches from dead ground and does not press. The point is exhaustion of will, not a body count. She shifts a knee off a hard stone and steadies her breathing. A small correction that keeps the body honest. By 5 to 6 a.m., the stragglers try to reform. They keep failing. Dawn makes faces clear, and the absence of enemies clearer. Which is somehow worse. Helmets turn and find nothing to fix on. The remaining men look at each other like strangers who forgot the same hour. On the adversary net, the rhythm loses its beat. Distances grow inside sentences. A sergeant calls for spacing and gets quiet instead. UH-60 support remains a standby line that no one touches. The coastal wind pushes 20 knots, and the cold spray lifts off basalt like a fine grit that stings the lips. The scene lands without victory noise. No chase. No triumphal run. Only a quiet recognition that the fight has been hollowed out by night and that patience was the decisive act. Dawn does not mend anything. It only outlines the fracture the night already made. At 9:07 a.m., Nora Quinn steps through the door frame of light into the field TOC near the Aleutian coast, looking like she took a long walk and not much else. Gear squared. Breath steady. Salt on the gloves. She gives a brief verbal report that lands more like a receipt than a story and puts the burden back on Evan Rourke. He nods once, accepts it, and the room exhales. Singars keeps a low murmur while wind around 20 knots tugs the canvas and leaves fresh coffee rings on a map already wrinkled from mist. A classified stamp dries crooked on the table. UH-60 support stays a box on the board that no one touches. Late morning rolls into a debrief that feels more like inventory than celebration. Mara Ellison lays out logs, thermal notes, and the timeline she tightened all night. Luis Ortega scrolls the tablet and reads off the clean blanks where contact should have been. Fingers smudged gray from a damp pen that skipped once and then behaved. Blake Anders leans forward and asks about teachability. Whether any of this can be pushed into a course and given to squads with a syllabus. Nora answers without flourish. The work depends on timing, human factors, and a psychology that cannot be standardized without breaking people. He sits back, not happy, but listening. At 11:12 a.m. Intel catches a private transmission. The adversary commander requests relief and psychological support for his unit. The words reach the tent with a mix of empathy and professional distance. No gloating. Just a quiet understanding that someone across the line is calling time on himself because the night rearranged how his people think. Rourke writes a single note and does not underline it. For a second, he almost does. By 1:12 p.m., Helena Grant arrives from brigade. Boots clean, eyes taking the temperature in one pass. She commends the outcome, then points to the boundary. Highest classification. Originator controlled. No foreign dissemination. Rourke acknowledges the chain and the caution. The wind stays tight. The method stays tighter. At 2:42 p.m., Nora files a 12-page technical report. It is heavy on intervals, patterns, and human thresholds. Light on recipes. She writes that such tactics should stay rare, case-specific, never scaled, and signs with a hand that still smells faintly of seagrass. Ortega watches the tablet show report received and wipes another coffee ring into a blur he will later regret. The wind clicks the antenna like a metronome, and Tyler Beck, back from the Raven, checks. Notes that the air has finally stopped tasting like metal. The tent does not raise a banner. It draws a line. Not every effective method deserves to be scaled. Some things should remain as humane exceptions. Outside. Waves mark time against basalt. While the debrief settles into a vow of silence, the wind cannot lift. A week later, the field site carries a new hum. The kind that rides chow line, talk, and late radio checks. 3 junior soldiers catch Evan Rourke after a briefing and ask to learn what Nora Quinn did. He declines without drama and sends them back to their lanes. The unit cannot turn an exception into a template. Singars remains the backbone in the tents, steady and unglamorous, while wind around 20 knots lifts a damp edge of canvas and lets in a line of cold. Mara Ellison hears the story traveling on the net and keeps her logs factual. Luis Ortega does the same, though he catches himself almost saying too much, then simply marks times and places. Blake Anders keeps people on current rolls, and the rhythm holds. Nora submits a transfer request to a special operations adjacent assignment, so attention dies down. She writes that her value increases when the spotlight is gone and hands it in without flourish. For a second, she nearly keeps a souvenir patch, then tucks it back where it belongs. Approval comes fast. UA 60 transport drops in low. Rotor wash, kicking gravel, and lifting the tarp edge. She carries a small box with her name tape and gives a brief nod at the skids. No ceremony. No speech. Just footprints thinning across wet basalt. The team watches her go and understands what lives in their hands now. Stewardship. Not hype. The method must stay rare so the people stay intact. The best kind of legend knows when to fade before anyone tries to copy it. The rotor thump dissolves into the gray, and the chow line returns to weather, batteries, and the next shift change. After sunrise, the Black Rock coast settles. Field TOC packs down while radar hums. And no one has died. The RQ-11B Raven makes final landing. Radios. Go clear. Adversary moves differently, cautious and clustered. 1 LT Evan Rourke signs off the log. SSG Mara Ellison and CPL Luis Ortega close comms. A glove slipping on damp canvas. Some nights the wind needs no flag. You take the fear out of a heart and walk away. Quiet weighs more than noise.